Good evening. It's Joyful Christian Hermit. Going to share a few of the incidents or situations, occurrences that people had with Blessed Father Solanus Casey, and just a little bit about his background too. And this is the priest, and he was a priest. He was a porter, but also a priest. And he was it's what was called a provisional priest, not the same as one that went through all of the studies. He did not have the schooling. He was born to a poorer family in Wisconsin, a farm family, and he did not have the benefit of a lot of education. But the Capuchins allowed him to go ahead and become a priest with certain provisions. So he could celebrate Mass. I think it was he could not hear confession. There were certain things he could not do. And maybe just certain Masses also. But he was, he was born in, as I said, in Wisconsin. Trying to find, I should have found that spot ahead of time. And was one of many children. And he at a young age realized he had a vocation. But it was he was worked as a cable operator of like a cable car in Milwaukee, I think it was. And he witnessed a woman being savagely murdered by someone on the street. And that really affected him greatly, as it would anyone. But he felt called to become a priest. And his diocese recognized, and they were kind about it with him, that he didn't have the educational background needed, but suggested that he try a religious order. And so that's when he got in touch with the Capuchins in Detroit. Capuchins are a branch of the Order of St. Francis. So he became a member of the Franciscan Friars, a Capuchin Order of St. Francis. And he was in the Detroit, it was called St. Bonaventure Friary, for years and years. And but he became recognized by people in that area as very holy, and who had a gift of sight and of healing, and so foresight. So his superiors decided they would send him to this small little town, probably about a 4-hour drive away from Detroit, where there was a small friary, one of their friaries. And that's where they sent him. He was there from 1946 to 1956, when with poor health he was sent back then to St. Bonaventure Friary in Detroit, where he passed away a year later in 1957. So he was an old man when he was in the small town, and he touched many people's lives. Word spread among people there, the story as to why this old Capuchin friar was there. Word got out from some of the friars from the monastery, I'm sure. And I'm very familiar with the place. When I was allowed to go back to the Midwest by a judge with my children, I lived in the same neighborhood, but it was really only like a street across from the monastery. But the friars had sold it. They weren't getting enough vocations, and they decided to sell that property. And it was very sad. I was very sad when I came back and found that that had happened. I wasn't Catholic, but it just was very sad. I wish that they hadn't. They sold it to the Church of some United Brethren church, and then, but it was that nothing much happened with it, with that church, and it was a large property and a large building, obviously. So eventually, then a Catholic man who was very well off had a foundation, and he bought it back for the church. So it's back in hands of the Catholic Church, and it's now a retreat center, and it's serving people in various ways with all kinds of retreats and tours. And since they also had an anniversary celebration mass there when Father Solanus became blessed, when he was in his canonization process. So this friend of mine decided he wanted to put together a little book on local people's memories, and they also included people from New York, a diocese in New York, upstate New York, because Father Solanus was a priest there for a while in a monastery in New York, Capuchin, for a while in his life, and then back to Detroit. So there were people there who had some memories and experiences of supernatural nature. And some of these just speak of Father Solanus just as the loving, humble, simple, joyous monk priest that he was. So I actually, when I became Catholic in 1995, a book was given to me by this priest, the first priest I went to, and the Lord told me I was to go to that priest. All of that's quite a story. But I was definitely led into the Catholic Church by God, and specifically which parish I was to go to, and I was forewarned of it 2 years prior, before I even saw the priest. I saw him someplace. I was doing an article, so I was interviewing someone an older man, and his wife was ill, and the priest happened to come to bring her communion and to visit her. And as soon as he walked in the door, this priest, a voice inside of me said, "This is the priest you're to go to." It was like God was carrying on the rest of the sentence. 2 years prior, I had an aunt through marriage, through a second marriage, with my uncle who had passed away. And it was the uncle that had become Catholic from marrying a Catholic woman with his first marriage. And she had passed away, so he remarried another Catholic woman, and she passed away. And I went to the funeral mass at this parish. And when I was in there, this voice told me within, "This is where you are to be buried." Or to be buried from, or to that effect. I have it written down somewhere exactly in my journals, but and my immediate response back to this voice, to God, was, "Well, I'm not Catholic. I won't have my funeral here. This won't be." And but later on, when I did become Catholic, I realized that it could be, even in a broad sense, that God meant that I would be a Catholic when I died, that I would be buried as a Catholic. And so anyway, so it took about another year for me to get the courage to call that priest and then to go visit him, and lots of dreams that would keep taking me to that church, but always through wrong way streets. It was all topsy-turvy in the dream, how I would be driving around and always end up at that parish church. So this priest was a Capuchin, and he knew Father Solanus. He was a young priest, young friar, and he has some memories here that I'm going to share. But I found this data. Father Solanus was born November 25th. Birthday's coming up in a couple of days here. 1870 on a farm in Oak Grove, Wisconsin. And he was called Bernard, known as Barney. He was the sixth of 16 children, born to a devout Catholic family of Irish immigrants. He survived, miraculously so, diphtheria, and 2 of his siblings died, but his voice was permanently disabled from it. Evidently, it was sort of high, a higher voice, and just sounded different. It was obviously disabled from something. But he was a streetcar operator, and that's when, and he had other jobs too, as a lumberjack, hospital orderly, and a prison guard. But when he was working as a streetcar operator, he witnessed this brutal murder of a woman by a drunken sailor. And that event just affected him so deeply that it led to his call to become a priest. And then I've already explained how he ended up becoming a Capuchin priest, a provisional priest under special provision, but a priest. And his family all came when he was ordained. They were very, very proud of him. They were a very devout family. And he was given the name Solanus after a Saint Francis Solanus, a 17th century Spanish Franciscan, who loved to play the violin, as Saint Francis Solanus did. And Father Solanus also loved the violin. So he made his first vows in 1898 and was ordained July 24th in 1904. He celebrated his first Mass a week later in Appleton, Wisconsin, with his family in attendance. So he was actually assigned in parishes in New York City. And he was sought after as an inspirational speaker because he was very, very close to God. And then his became known for healing of the sick, of having this gift. So it was in 1924, though, after 20 years, he was back in Detroit at the St. Bonaventure Monastery, where he helped found a Capuchin soup kitchen and helped a lot of people in that area, in Detroit area, through the Depression years. And it was about 1946 his health began to fail, and he was sent then to this small town, to this friary to recover, or to have a rest, but also to help him be able to rest, because he would be inundated by people seeking him out in the Detroit area. People would come from all over, actually, to meet him, drive distances to come to meet this Capuchin priest. But when he arrived in the small town, everybody knew, the rumors started. And people in Detroit found out where he was. So word spread. So as I'd mentioned in another video, busloads would come. But he had a small room. He slept on a straw mattress, simple straw mattress. He never turned away a visitor or anyone seeking his counsel. He was a very congenial person. He had a way of calming people, very loving, well, he was close to God. God is pure love in him, and he knew it. A lot of this that I mention is knowing. A big step is in knowing in truth and in faith and rejoicing and in praising God that his pure love is in us. And we can be in his pure love. And then we pray and ask God to help us live accordingly. Help us live love. God is pure love. It has to be God's pure love that we live, his way of love. So some of his famous words were, "We must be faithful to the present moment, or we will frustrate the plan of God for our lives." We must be faithful to the present moment, or we will frustrate the plan of God for our lives. Another very famous statement he would say is, "Thank God ahead of time." He would encourage people, when we pray, always thank God ahead of time. Show God that we have faith, that he hears our prayers and will answer our prayers according to his will, and that we are grateful. Thank him ahead of time. So as I said, in 1956, he returned to Detroit, and in the last year of his life was when this young Capuchin priest, who I knew, and who is back at St. Bonaventure now, he retired. I think he was maybe 80 or 82 when he retired as a priest in the small town. He was there for years and years. But that was the year that the last year of Father Solanus' life, that he came to know him. And he would listen to Father Solanus play his violin. So that was one memory that he had. He had other memories. Now, he did remember when Father Solanus died on July 31st, 1957, that Father Solanus' final words were, "I give my soul to Jesus Christ." That's what Father Solanus' final words were as he died. "I give my soul to Jesus Christ." So they began his beatification cause, or his canonization cause, in 1976. So he became servant of God, Solanus Casey. And so he was made venerable in 1995 by Pope John Paul II. That's when I met this priest, the Capuchin priest, who knew him, and he lent me a book that had just come out on Father Solanus Casey, a biography of his life to read. That was the very first book that he had me read. And he gave me some relic badges and the little brochures. The relic badges are little ovals, had a Father Solanus' photo on one side, and on the back side was a prayer and a little information about, just brief information, who he was and everything. And then a little bit of cloth, brown habit, cloth that was Capuchin habit, that had been touched up against Father Solanus' body. So that's considered I think it's a third class relic or second class relic. A first class relic is an actual part of the person, like a bone splinter even, or a hair from the person's head. That's a first class. And then I think second class is something that the person actually wore. And then the third class is a piece of cloth that's touched to the person. but it's not their habit. It's not their habit. Sometimes they will cut up the person's habit in little tiny bits, and then those are put into little badges covered in plastic and usually crocheted around or stitched around the edges. So anyway, that's some background on him. And here's some memories of this priest, this Capuchin priest. And this is what he says. I received a phone call. Father, we are not Catholic and we are an old couple. Could you come to see us? So he went to this couple's house in this town. And they said, last night, my husband slept in a chair in the front room. He has cancer and sleeps in the chair. I'm in the bed in the bedroom. I heard this talking and thought he had the radio on. The next morning, I went to the kitchen and found 2 piles of pecan shells on the table. My husband said, you'll never believe this, but last night I couldn't sleep and all of a sudden there was an old man in a brown robe standing in front of me. He said he was hungry, so we went to the kitchen. I found a bag of pecans and he ate them. He said God sent him to prepare me for death, that he would come to help me when I die. And she said her husband was so confused. So she had a picture of Father Solanus and showed it to him. And her husband said, that's the man who was here last night. And the priest comments, I never saw those people after that. But Father Solanus loved the town and loved the people in the town. He had this memory of Father Solanus. We as a couple of novices weren't feeling well. He was one of the novices. And went to Father Solanus's room and asked him for prayer. He said, no, Capuchins are supposed to suffer. He was a hardliner on that, one of these young novices to toughen up. Here was another. A man fell, injuring himself very seriously. I went to the hospital to visit him, and he was in a real bad condition. This was after Father Solanus had passed away. I pinned a Father Solanus badge on his bed. He made a complete recovery. Here's another situation that this priest was telling about. A man was dying of cancer, and he was in a coma. He was non-Catholic. His wife, a parishioner though, asked me to bless him. He had no visitors, and I pinned a Father Solanus badge to his bed. He made a complete recovery. This happened more than 24 to 30 years ago. He still works full-time in a very prominent job. And then it's the final story that this priest shares. It's, again, one about himself. I was scrubbing toilets as a novice and felt sorry for myself. All of my high school graduate classmates were at Notre Dame, etc., living their lives. Here I am on my hands and knees in a monastery scrubbing toilets. Father Solanus walked into the bathroom and said, "Oh, how lucky you are to be cleaning toilets for your brothers." I thought he was crazy, but I never forgot those words. He lived that way. He lived humbly and with gratitude. So there are other stories. I'll tell the one that I was involved with. Because he gave me the relic. And there was another one. Had I known, I could have told them of another situation that happened with someone that I had given a relic badge to. But this one was a major healing. I had just become Catholic. I'll read what he says. This was he was the editor of the local newspaper and a friend of mine. He and his wife were friends of mine, and 2 other couples. When I went back there, I re-met a guy I knew from high school. I actually knew him from when I was 3. in the cradle roll room of the Methodist Church. We remember each other from way back then. And then we knew each other growing up, all through high school. We played in the band together. And his wife, or second wife, and another couple had moved into town who my parents had befriended, the couple who'd moved into town before my parents had moved out to Arizona. So they also then, with this newspaper editor and his wife, they were three couples, very, very close friends. And when I moved back, they took me under their wing. This divorcee, me, this single woman with three children and all this pain. And they were the loveliest of friends, included me. And then when it came time for me, when I converted, they stuck with me. It was hard. They didn't understand why I did that, but they tried to. And then when I became a hermit, I shared with them, had them over for dinner, and they really respected me for that. They've remained friends, especially one of them, the one that I went through high school with. But when I had a shoulder surgery, all three of those couples brought me food because it was such a bad surgery that I couldn't cook, and they were the ones that helped me. It was their charity that drove to where I lived and brought me food. So this is though what happened with this man, a newspaper friend of mine. And he writes this: though I consider myself a nominally devout Protestant, I have had a very personal bond with Blessed Solanus Casey for more than a quarter century. Here is how it began. Through the late spring and early summer of 1995, at the age of 47, I was not feeling well. This is my friend, this man, editor of the paper. I had contracted a respiratory virus in February and had never quite shaken it. My energy was flagging. I had a constant dry cough, which interfered with my sleep. I was always short of breath, especially after even the slightest exertion. One June evening, breathing had become so difficult, I got into my car and drove around the city with the air conditioning on full blast, the dashboard louvers tilted toward my face in an effort to force air up my nose. I knew then I needed help. The next day, I went to the emergency room at the local hospital. I remember this vividly, and getting a call from his wife, my friend, his wife. And the other two women also got in touch with me too. Several tests and a chest x-ray later, I was diagnosed with bronchitis, given a prescription, and sent home. Later that day, a physician friend of mine happened to look at my x-ray and saw something he didn't like. That was another friend of ours, this physician friend. He had me admitted directly to a hospital in a nearby city. The next day, this is this man telling it, the next day I was told I had a condition called idiopathic of unknown origin cardiomyopathy, and that I was in congestive heart failure. And he wasn't that, he was just 47. I was 44 then. I was even more shocked to learn that the medical endgame for cardiomyopathy was a heart transplant. I remember getting that call from his wife that night in tears about his heart and that you needed a heart transplant and wasn't likely to live. And depending on how I responded to treatment, that might be my final recourse. My cardiologist said about 3% of people with the condition regain normal heart function. I knew my life would be different and likely much shorter from that point on. And this man had 4 children in my kids' age range. 2 of them went to high school with my one daughter, and the other daughter too. Both of the daughters went to high school with their children. And He was home from the hospital a few days later, he writes. As word of my condition spread, visitors would stop by the house to cheer me up. Among them was a lady named Beep Beep. My wife and I had got to know her at our United Methodist Church. She had recently converted to Catholicism. I had just converted, in fact. She brought her best wishes for my recovery and left something with me. And I remember doing this, going to their house, and the story's a little bit different than what he remembers. There was something else that I had him do that he'd forgotten about. But as she said goodbye that day, she pressed some hope into my hand. It was a relic of Father Solanus Casey, widely available to the faithful, consisting of 2 small plastic ovals bound in yarn. Encased between the ovals is his photo on one side, and on the other side his last words in a tiny snippet of cloth that had been touched to his tomb. I knew a bit about Father Solanus from local lore. He didn't know anything at all when I talked to him, but I'd read the book and I told him that, he would do miracles even after his death, that he would. But after he got that relic, then he did ask around and found out that he'd spent some of the final years of his life in the community there where we lived, and was widely admired. And he said that I told him to keep the memento with me whenever I could. Well, no, I told him, he had a shirt on that day. I remember it. The color was a plaid. It was sort of a light yellow with a plaid to it, some darker stripes in it. And he had a pocket that was near his heart. I said, you put that in that pocket. Keep it near your heart. But then he had another idea of what he wanted, where he was going to keep it then. And I was very insistent. I'm a very zealous person, actually. And I love people. And of course, here was my friend and his wife, even close. I knew her even better, and just did not want this to be happening to him. His kids and all in high school, and I think the youngest was maybe in 8th or 7th grade then, younger. So he says, when I assured her I would put it in my wallet, and he did, he then put it in his wallet, because that's the one thing I always carried. She had one admonition: just don't let it touch any money. And I didn't remember that, but that sounds like me. I was very, but it's true, I didn't want it to be unholy, with temporal. I'm this way, I'm into this. I was then, of respecting the holy and not profaning anything with money or something that's such of the world, But I had first put it down in his chest pocket and said, please, keep that in there. But I think he did probably take it out, because he says, well, I'm not going to wear this shirt all the time, What'll I do in the winter time and stuff? So he says, I followed her instructions, tucked it away in an inner compartment of my wallet. I was grateful for the kind gesture and the prayers from me and others that came with it. And I spread word, to people I knew to pray, and the whole town was, really. From that day forward, he got better. Over the next few months, I adapted to my medications and exercise regimen. I began breathing normally again and regained my energy. My measurable heart function returned with astonishing speed. My doctor was impressed. My wife and children were delighted. I was awed by what I assumed was my good fortune, and by what I am convinced was the restorative power of prayer. Many people were praying for my recovery. Often I would pull the relic from my wallet and spend a few moments to ponder Father Solanus's visage and the dark scrap of cloth. I came to understand there was much more working on my behalf than the medicines and the daily walks. I am certain that God, through Father Solanus, has provided me with a special healing. I don't presume to know how it works, but what I do know is that I am one of the few people with idiopathic cardiomyopathy who have recovered full heart function and have had a chance to enjoy a normal life. Thanks to my friend and Father Solanus. Father Solanus is with me today, and I will keep him with me every day for the rest of my life. I don't know why I deserve his blessing, but I believe that I have received it, and I thank God for it. So there's other stories in this little book. It's called Memorable Graces. Memorable Graces, and it's just a simple little book. And I think I would recommend there's another book. There's many books, but there's a book. It's written by a woman that is his biography. It goes into far more depth and will also list many more. These were local people, and it was very beautiful, though, the things that happened. And not all were healed, but some he would just reassure people. He would reassure them that it'll be okay. It will be okay. There was another one with a little girl who had a very bad growth on her neck, and the doctor couldn't remove it or anything. It was huge in there. And they were all very concerned about it. And her big brother took her to the park one day. She was 6 years old, and her dad, I guess, was a fireman. So she got this idea. She was going to slide down one of the slide poles. Instead of going down the slide, she got off at the top and slid down the pole and lost grip and went down too fast and hit hard and ended up hitting her neck on a metal plate or something. The metal hit her neck. And the brother rushed over, her older brother, and picked her up. And of course, she was upset and everything and had been hurt. And she was sort of dazed and in shock, sort of breath knocked out of her, this little girl, 6-year-old. And he took her home to their mother, and the mother immediately took her to the doctor, this Dr. Brubaker. He's the one that got me out, brought me into the world. And I think one of the last, no, actually my friend Mary's twins were his last babies he gave birth, or he delivered. And she only thought she was having one, and he said, no, there's something else going on here. So she had to quickly think up another name for another boy. And that was her second to last pregnancy. She had one more son, Thomas. But Dr. Brubaker, my dad went to him as a boy, even for a boil he had. So anyway, this little girl, the mother got him to the doctor, and that thing was totally gone. It was totally gone. They had just the day before taken her to see Father Solanus at the Friary. And he said, it's going to be okay. She's going to be okay. And then the very next day, the neck got hit, and that huge lump was totally gone. Dr. Brubaker had to stitch her up, clean up the blood. There was just nothing there. It's gone. So, and there's many other things like that, not all in this book, but Father Solanus, but some things more recently that Father Solanus has helped with people. And anyway, memories, anecdotes, testimonies. This book is by Lambing Press, if you're interested. It's a private Catholic press. I know Rick tried it where he used to work. He was a managing editor, but they didn't. And he told me on the phone, he says, he says, don't get excited. It's just, people wrote in these and someone typed them up, these little testimonies. So it's not an expansive book or anything, but it's very sweet stories that mean a lot, I think, to the people in the small town, especially. And there's a few stories from when he was in New York. I kept thinking it was upstate New York, but no, it was New York City that he had. He had been in New York City, so there's some stories here from some of those people, and somebody from Detroit. So anyway, that's Father Solanus, and I know that Mary's son, when he texted me later today, I think they're opening up to the reality of how very ill their mother is, stage 4 lung cancer. And that she has no appetite and is very, very weak. And he says it's very upsetting seeing her suffer. And so they're talking, God's will, whatever God wills. And also the fact that they're not going to do any kind of focused treatment for 2 to 4 weeks. I think that's discouraging, but probably indicative that the doctors feel that it's pretty advanced. It's in her liver and in her pancreas also. But the where it came from, it started in the lungs. And just, it would be totally unexpected. She was not a smoker and not a drinker and very devout person. The people in that town consider her a saint. They consider Mary a saint. Very holy, very humble, and loves her grandchildren, her children, hardworking, and giving, very giving, and lived very, very simply in this old house, big old house, reared her children there, homeschooled them, and she still lives there, in fact. Someone's checking in on her every day, her son said, and grandchildren, or she has a couple of grandchildren. One's married, and one's was married, but has 2 little children. So she's being checked in on by family, and he's in the nearby city. So, and every people know her. So, I haven't. I'll text her I'll text her. The only time I've spoken to her, she was coughing so badly, but she says, "Oh, it's just my allergies." But she was having difficult talking. But it reminded me of another friend of mine who had ended up with lung cancer. Sounded the same voice, same coughing. So, and so whatever happens, but it would be quite a miracle if Father Solanus would answer our request to pray for her and to intercede with God on her behalf. That would be an incredible miracle. Now, Rick tells me that he thinks they already have the canonization miracle, but I don't know. But a miracle such as Mary's being totally healed of how sick she is would definitely be a canonization quality miracle. So, but I think that the son said to me, wrote this, he says, "I'm realizing, why wouldn't Jesus want my mother close with him there? Why should we have her? He would want her." Because, those children, they love their mother, and they know that she's an unusually holy person, and very dedicated, very disciplined, and very devoted. And as I mentioned, I don't know if it was one of the videos that I erased, but I think she's been very concerned for me and has hung in with me, fearful that I would quit or give up maybe. And she had told me she was going to make sure I had a Catholic Mass, because I don't have family or anything that would do that when I die. But I'm content with a graveside like my mother, whatever God allows me, I'm content with. And just with as God has unfolded my life. But we'll just see what happens with Mary. But that's what they're asking people to ask Father Solanus. But today Thomas was, or whatever is God's will. And of course they would say that anyway. But I'm still asking Father Solanus to intercede for Mary, because she doesn't want to be ill like this, I'm sure, and fatigued. And she did tell me, that she's sort of in shock, and not sort of, big time, wasn't at all expecting this. And she wants to live. She wants to be here longer for her grandchildren and her children. She has a new one coming in about 3 weeks, new little grandchild. So, anyway, that's a little bit about him. I'll stop yapping. I can keep just going on with thoughts and need to learn to discipline myself. Thank God ahead of time. That's what we can be doing for Brian. That's Christopher's cousin who was electrocuted and has had, just talk about a miraculous healing, and he didn't have to have a very expected final surgery. So that was a wonderful blessing from God. So we thank God ahead of time for Brian finding a new career that will be amenable to his body and his life and his needs for his family and himself, because probably continuing as an electrician, it probably isn't going to work. He had to have skin grafts and things from being so electrocuted and burned, and it was critical condition. So it's okay, lovey. It's okay, honey. So, probably can't do that kind of wiring, and probably psychologically, emotionally is ready for something else. I think I would be, most definitely. Ready for a new career, and maybe God wanted that in Brian too. I always think when major things happen in life, God wants us to start looking for what else he wants of us, and not to stay on that same path. That's what happened with me when I was out of that soup kitchen. God immediately called me to the hermit life with Hermit, definite hermit. So he was ready for me to address me with it straight on. So that was a big change, and that helped me understand why the other had to happen the way it did. So God bless you all, and thank God ahead of time in all our prayers and praises of God.